Welcome to Know Your Rights, New Jersey. I am your host, Rhinold Lamar Ponder. Usually on Know Your Rights, New Jersey, we focus on specific issues or aspects of the law. However, sometimes we can learn more about the law and government by studying the lives of those like today's guest. Albert Stark gives us an opportunity to focus on one of those fascinating lives associated with developments in the law and the way it impacts us. Albert is one of the founders of Stark & Stark, a local but nationally prominent full-service firm. Albert, whose practice focuses advocacy for brain trauma victims, is a legal pioneer in the use of video in the courtroom. He has hosted numerous radio and television shows on the law and government. He is the author of 3 books, including Beyond the Bar, Challenges in a Lawyer's Life, and Insider Secrets to Winning Your Personal Injury Battle. Albert is celebrating his 50th year in the bar. Today, he spends a significant amount of time and focus on educating lawyers and advocating for our soldiers. I'm pleased to welcome Albert Stark.
Great to be here, Rhinold.
Thank you for joining us. We have a wonderful life and a lot of ground to cover. Let's start from almost the beginning. You are a local, raised in Trenton, and you come from an entrepreneurial family. Can you tell us what that was like and how that helped shape you?
Trenton shaped me a great deal because going through the Trenton public schools, attending Trenton High School, which in the 1950s was a very good academic school with a great deal of diversity. I got involved in advocating through debate some unpopular causes, and found that I had a passion for convincing other people to make their life better and to make life better for others.
Now that passion for advocating for others is a thread throughout your entire life. So how was that stoked? How did that actually start?
Well, actually, I was a small person. I learned on the tennis court that if you kept getting the balls back, maybe somebody else would make a mistake. But I think that my real passion was ignited in 1956 when I went as one of the first Freedom Riders down to Selma and Tuscaloosa, and actually got a voter registration kit from what turned out to be Martin Luther King.
Wow.
I saw what it was like to live in shacks, to be afraid to sign a voting petition for fear that if I signed it, my life might be in danger. And I saw what it was like to be told, go back north, we like segregation down here.
Now, when you rode, were you in college at the time?
I was.
And you were at Dartmouth?
I was.
How did you decide to go to Dartmouth, and what attracted you to these events?
Well, the reason I went to Dartmouth was because my very good tennis friends were going to Yale, and there were so many of them that I wouldn't be able to play tennis at Yale, but I was able to play tennis at Dartmouth. And I went there. I loved the coach, and I liked the teammates that I met, and I liked the academic program, and I wanted to get away from home. And rather than go to a local college called Princeton, I went to Dartmouth.
Now, another thread or theme throughout your life seems to be one of identity, and that is one of finding out who you are, which I imagine that's a theme through everybody's life. It's a major theme in literature. It's a major theme in life. You were the son of an attorney, a very prominent attorney. Tell us a little bit about how you started to find yourself, especially because as I recall in the readings, you thought you were going to be a med school student at one point.
Well, I was, except that I killed the dogfish, and I don't think that physical chemistry was my forte.
Well, I heard that you had bad hands. You couldn't sew.
If I were a doctor, I would be called malfunction junction. But getting back to your question, you know, one of the biggest challenges that I've had in my life was going from my father's son They used to call me Sidney's son when I first started practicing law. And it took a while before Sidney was Albert's father.
And how did you get to that point? And not only externally, but internally, I'm sure it had its own challenges.
I didn't know it then. And most young lawyers don't know it today. But learning how to become vulnerable was something that happened because the one thing that my father gave me when I practiced, and one thing that Governor Hughes gave me when I worked with him when I first came back to this area, was the ability to fail. You know, in our society, you've been through school, our audience has been through school, we're taught to get the answers right. And we're punished if the answer is wrong. And we go through our education trying to get things right. And we're afraid to get things wrong. Well, when you become a lawyer, one of the most difficult things to learn, but one of the most important things to learn, is vulnerability. Because without vulnerability, without the ability to be given the opportunity to fail, you squelch creativity. And the law is a field where if you cannot express and act out your creativity, it leads to a very frustrating and almost narrow life.
Your vulnerability and I don't want to necessarily term it in terms of failure, but of learning about who you are and how to take risks. A lot of that seemed to have developed from your wife's difficult first pregnancy.
I learned a lot after my son was born with a paralysis in an arm, and my wife came out of it with a paralysis in her leg. I was actually in New York where he was getting physical therapy, and I met people who had been very seriously injured. And they were angry. They were angry at their lawyers who wanted to take 1/3 and didn't really give them any social help. They were giving them legal help, but they weren't giving them emotional help. And I saw there was an opportunity to really help people who needed the help. And the only way you could do that, because most people who are injured don't have the money to pay for legal services like a corporation would, or an insurance company does, and you take a case based on your chances of winning and thinking about also the chances of losing. And one of the things that the contingent fee or the at-risk fee does, and did for me, was I was able to take cases where I got a very good result for the client and a good result for me, and I was able to use the money that I made on the good cases to help people who didn't have good cases but who needed the chance to have their day in court.
But you weren't always in a position where, or were you, in the position where you had it right in front of you the funds and the wherewithal to handle some of the difficult cases that you were handling?
No, I didn't have the funds. But fortunately, I was able to convince a banker at the Broad Street Bank in those days that if they gave me a loan, interest only, for a year or 2 years, that they would be the first one I paid back. And I didn't own a house at that time. I had no credit. And a banker put his faith in me. His name was Ray Steen. And he gave me the opportunity to take some long shot cases, and they happened to, with a lot of preparation and a lot of sweat, turn out okay for both the lawyer and the client.
So that brings to mind to me what seems to be one of the most difficult paradoxes, and that's between service of a clientele and business. How did you as an attorney come to grips with? Are you constantly coming to grips with that?
constantly coming to grips with it. As a matter of fact, some people in the legal profession call me the socialist because we've grown stark and stark
Right.
by investing in people and in our clients. I mean, the managing partners of our law firm, Stark and Stark was their first job. My secretary, before she retired, was with me for 45 years. My second legal assistant is now with the firm 48 years.
That's fantastic.
So we have longevity, and we've developed a culture of trust.
Well, let's go back and talk about your your first 15 years in practice. And I recently reread your book, Beyond the Bar, which is just a wonderful, I think a must-read for attorneys. One, because you talk about the vulnerability. You're very honest about some of the issues and the questions that it raises.
Thank you.
But one thing I'd like for you to talk to us about is people. How your relationships as a counselor, as opposed to simply a businessman, led you to good results, good relationships.
One of the things that you have to learn, and I learned it early on, actually, in one of my first cases, from the fellow who was my first boss running a steamroller during a summer job. Every injury, every case is personal to the person. And if you understand that, and you find out what is personal to the person, you not only become a good advocate, but you become a good friend. If you come into my office, I have mementos from Big Ed, from on and on and on, of people who, after the case, gave me something that was meaningful to them. And today, as I look around my office, I still see these people, some of whom are not with us anymore. But for example, a woman, she breaks her hand. She can't get to her back. Think about what that means with loss of independence to a woman, just having to take care of her bra strap. Take somebody who has a bad leg and a limp, and who was a Little League soccer coach, who can't kick the ball with his team. Think about a father who can't bend down and play with his kid. A woman who's got an injury to her arms or hand, who can't unscrew lids or take care of pots. Getting to know people and how a situation affects them gives you, the lawyer, empathy, and it gives you the passion to really advocate for them in a human way, in a way that people can understand, rather than in a legal way where people can't understand it.
But Howard, going back to something you said, isn't that really rather difficult for the young attorney? Because just go back to your statement that we are taught to, in a book way, in a book manner, to be right. Not to be listeners, not to be what you're referring to as empathetic. I'm curious as to how you became empathetic, and one of the reasons I raised your wife's difficulty pregnancy, as you raised in the book, was because you seemed to develop some empathy. How did you develop your empathy, and what can attorneys do today to do exactly what you just stated in terms of their relationships as counselors with their clients?
One of the things I was blessed with was Mercer County lawyers. As a young lawyer, I was able to go to other lawyers and sit down, just like we're sitting down, and say, you know, I have a question. I have a challenge. I have a problem. There were so many Mercer County lawyers that helped me in my early stages. As I developed, as you know, I developed a national network of the top lawyers and the top physicians
That's right.
in the country, if not the world. And they asked me questions, I asked them questions, and I always thought the two heads were better than one, even if one was cabbage. And so it wasn't something that you're born with. I mean, you're born with empathy if you can let it come out, but it's something that you have to develop. And I was lucky enough to have colleagues older than I was, more experienced than I was, really helped me and nursed me and helped me climb the ladder.
Talk to me a little bit about your experience when you first started out. You weren't always, you've done a wide variety of legal things, but you talk to me about being a prosecutor and your early experiences as a prosecutor and learning about justice and what that might have really meant realistically, systemically. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I started as a prosecutor, I took an oath to uphold the laws, the Constitution of the United States and the state of New Jersey. And after 18 months doing that, I watched the Democratic National Convention, 1968, and I saw what the police were doing to the demonstrators. And it was ugly, and it was, in my mind, wrong. And I came into the office the next day, and I said to one of my supervisors, I said, I don't know how long I can stay on this job. And he berated me, because it was the days of Vietnam, and who did I think, I was. And shortly after that, I had a police officer who I knew was lying, who had planted drugs on a young man in Trenton. And I came home and I said to my wife, I have to try this case tomorrow, and I really can't stand up and say that I am a representative of the state of New Jersey. And I submitted my resignation. And I must tell you that that was a very difficult thing for me to do, because I had a wife and I had a child, and I had another one on the way. And how was I going to make a living? But I always said that there's a difference between ethics and justice. Neither are perfect. But I've always said that when I'm practicing and I'm a lawyer, it has to pass the mother test.
And what was the mother test?
The mother test was, if I told this to my mother, what would she tell me to do?
And do you still follow that test? It's worked for you this far.
I have. Now I actually, fortunately I was blessed with a lawyer's lawyer, who my father, so now I have a mother and father test.
What's the father's test? It's the
Same.
exact same test? When did you adopt that one? That test, that particular test? Or when did you knowingly adopt it? Because you've probably had it all the time.
I don't think I ever knowingly adopted it, but Eugene O'Neill writes many novels about the importance and the value of a name.
Right.
And my father earned a good name, my grandfather earned a good name, and I wasn't going to take the risk of harming
them.
How diminishing the name.
How much do you think, in retrospect, being from an entrepreneurial family helped you as an entrepreneur, in addition to a lawyer, but also as an entrepreneur?
I think it really helped me a lot, because my grandfather had self-service laundries where people came in and they were called washerettes. And I would go on Saturdays and work there. And people were waiting for their laundry, and they needed their change, and they needed their stuff done. And I learned from an early age that you really had to take care of the customer. And if you were going to do something, you better do it right, because nobody wanted to get the wash wet and unfolded. So you know, I think that was, early lessons. And I had an uncle up in New Britain, Connecticut, who had a grocery store, and I used to deliver groceries and climb up fire escapes to deliver the groceries. So I sort of saw how business was run, and I learned arithmetic by, back in those days, they didn't have cashiers with, so when somebody called in an order, you put the price down on a bag and then you added it up. So, I became familiar with numbers and the importance of numbers and the difference between business and profession and customer care.
Now, I can't, as we talk about your life, I can't allow you to escape without talking a bit about your wife, Ellen, who's a wonderful person, her impact on your decision-making and the battles with justice and ethics and just who you are and how you treated people.
Actually, Ellen was my jury. Every case I tried in front of Ellen, as well as my two children. And Ellen is very perceptive, and she's not just a yes person. She would tell me what she thought was wrong with the case, but my two children taught me the best lesson, that no matter how complicated the case, if you can't tell it in a manner that a third grader can understand, you better start working more on your case. Humpty Dumpty, Jack and the Beanstalk, there are very good stories. The Little Engine That Could. So many people who are brain injured, spinal cord injured, burn injured, would love to be the little engine that could, but after their injury, they are not the little engine that could. They try and they try and they try and they huff and they puff and they puff, but they can't make it up the hill. And one of the things that I try to teach young lawyers and other lawyers is that, yeah, you're a lawyer, but you can't talk in legalese to people. If you can't explain something in third grade language, then you better learn more about what you're trying to explain.
Let's talk a little bit more, while we still have time, about the challenges that lawyers face and what it is that you're trying to teach lawyers to really essentially make them better advocates, better counselors, and not to be as frustrated as they might be otherwise in this profession.
Well, the one thing I try to emphasize is that they have to face reality. Today is a day of specialization, unfortunately. You in your practice experience that every day. When I started, I could do a bankruptcy case, I could do a personal injury case, I could do a real estate closing, I could do just about anything. Today, the law is so specialized that it's very difficult to do various types of law. Matrimonial law and personal injury law, even though they may require some of the same skills, the law is so different and the practice is so different that it's very difficult to mix them. Commercial real estate and residential real estate, very difficult to mix them. So the young lawyer has to face the reality of we are in an age of specialization, and they don't always have the ability to determine what they want to do. Because if they go to work with a law firm, the law firm is going to most likely, unfortunately, tell them what they want them to do. So the young lawyer has to face that reality and then really work to not leave his passion in the parking lot and find his way. The second thing that I try to tell young lawyers is that the judiciary is very different today in New Jersey than it was years ago. Judges today are overworked, they're underpaid, substantially underpaid, and being overworked and underpaid creates its own problems. But there's even a greater problem. And unfortunately, there's a chill in our judiciary in New Jersey which really hampers judges from making the call or the decision that they want to make. Because a judge gets appointed, he doesn't get tenure for 7 years, and unfortunately our governor has created a chill. He didn't appoint a very fine African-American justice, Justice Wallace. He didn't reappoint Helen Hones, a very fine justice who basically carried his bucket. And he has sent a message, very subtly, to the judges that if you don't decide the way I want you to decide, you may not be reappointed. And many of the judges have left being an attorney general or a public defender or a law practice and have basically given up some financial advantages to be on the bench. But the present atmosphere is at risk. So I tell young lawyers that you must help the judges. Don't be frustrated by the judges. Understand their frustration and work along with them to help your client. Many of them have now practiced law. They've never given a secretary a paycheck. They've worked for the state or they work for a municipality. Understand that they don't understand you. You have to educate them. You educate them about your pressures and your stresses and your insecurities. Because when I started practicing law 50 years ago, one of the reasons that people practice law was it was a secure job. Today, with the large law firms forcing people to make 2,000, 2,200 hours of billable time,
All right.
that's a lot of billable time. Think about it. You have to go to lunch, and you have to go here, and you have to go there. 2,200 hours is a lot. And they're basically on the clock. And that's a great deal of pressure that, unfortunately, is a deleterious thing. And it deprives young lawyers who have gone into the profession a quality of life which they deserve.
Well, Albert, I wish we had much more time because I have so many more questions for you. We must do this again. But thank you very much for being on the show and talking with us.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.